Davidson with the U.S. Fund for UNICEF. Thanks so much for joining us here today on our Google Hangout. We're going to be talking about Syria, and we're so pleased to have with us Lucy Liu, the award-winning actress, producer, director, and best of all for all of us at UNICEF, our tireless U.S. ambassador, or our tireless UNICEF ambassador since 2004. Lucy has recently returned from a trip to Lebanon with us, and we were really so pleased to have her there. She's always a wonderful advocate for UNICEF and its issues. We are also joined by Luciano Calestini. Luciano is the emergency coordinator since late January in the region, and Simon Ingram, who runs communications in the region. As we all know, we're looking at an increasing escalating crisis outside of Syria right now. In Lebanon, a country of 4 million people, which makes it slightly smaller than Connecticut, there are more than 568,000 registered Syrian refugees. Over 65,000 arrived just in June. According to the Lebanese government, there may be as many as another 500,000 who have not registered. That's 25% of Lebanon's own population, and it's creating a huge burden on the Lebanese government and people. Lucy, in your time in Lebanon, can you tell me a little bit about what you were seeing in these camps?
I think that when we were in Lebanon, I think the main thing was seeing how bright and energetic these children were, even under the worst conditions. And they were people gathering from all different places to find shelter wherever they could. And I mean, what I always focus on are the children, and these children had absolutely nothing, and they had a desperate need to go to school and to be a part of, you know, a community, and that is something that we could not give them. I think what we're dealing with right now is tens of thousands of people streaming in and trying to find safety and security in a situation that obviously is in a war-torn country. And I think that there's no sanitation, there's no clean water, there's not even the ability to know where some of these people are settling. And you know, a day after, they found a group of other people in a garage somewhere. And I think that, you know, not everyone's going to be able to register. So they've lost people, people have been killed in their families. It's a desperate situation.
What was it that really surprised you in this visit? I know in some of the film clips that came back from your visit, there's one shot where there are children leaping over what essentially looks like an open sewer. I'm always so startled by the resilience of children in these places, their insistence on being children. Did you experience that when you were there?
Yes, and I think that's what's so lovely about children. Under even difficult circumstances, they continue to want to play and enjoy life and enjoy each other, and that's what a child should do. They should have a childhood, and unfortunately, what we're calling this right now is a children's crisis. And as I said earlier, there's a quality about children that is so wonderful, that they come up to you and they hold your hand and they want to be close to you, they want to interact, they want to engage, and they want to learn. And going to school and playing, these are not just things that children do, it also helps their growth. It helps stimulate physical and mental acuity, and this is something that sometimes we forget, you know, and under the situation, the circumstances they're in right now, it's nearly impossible for them to think about anything but survival.
Yeah. How does this compare, Lucy? You've traveled with us quite a bit. How does this compare to some of the other situations you've seen?
This is a very, very hard situation because of what is going on right now. It's continuing to get worse, and the conflict in Syria isn't easing up anytime soon, and I think it's also adding a great deal of pressure for the people that are hosting these refugees, because the resources are already limited, and it's becoming even more stretched as they go. And I think that is going to create a lot of tension, because you know, if there's very little to begin with, it's going to have less for the people who are actually, you know, living in that area, in those areas, and that's going to be difficult because it's a very poor area already.
Luciano, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that what is the situation right now in Lebanon? 68,000 people coming into the communities just in the last month. How many Syrian children are there in Lebanon right now? And talk to us a little bit about what they're facing.
Sure, thanks, Lisa. And well, just following on from Lucy's remarks, she was here a few weeks ago and saw firsthand some of the challenges these children are facing. As you mentioned, there's almost 570,000 registered Syrian refugees in Lebanon now, but the actual number could be more than double that. That means that at a minimum there are 300,000 Syrian children in Lebanon in extremely difficult conditions. 200,000 of those are school age, and we know because along with some partners and obviously the Ministry of Education, we've been working to register that the majority of those are not in school. We've managed to register or enroll rather 32,000, but there are tens and tens of thousands not in school, which is an enormous challenge for a child in terms of regaining a sense of normalcy and community, as Lucy mentioned. We have been, since January, undergoing major immunization campaigns because what we've found is that with the situation in Syria leading to the collapse of much of the public health system, the children who are arriving now, having survived 2 years of war, have not been accessing medical care, and it's essential that the basics are in place to avoid things like outbreaks. So we've immunized more than 600,000 children just since January. An issue that has not been very critical up until now, but we suspect is going to become so quite soon, is that of nutrition. We have growing anecdotal evidence that malnutrition is going to become an issue, particularly for those children in those poorest areas with the least access to services, which are the areas that Lucy visited. And of course, something that's often neglected or forgotten is the psychological impacts on children who have lived through such incredible conflict, and in some cases witnessed, and in even more extreme cases forced to participate in horrific acts of violence. UNICEF is right now ramping up its effort to treat the mental health of hundreds of thousands of children who have seen things that children should not even hear about, let alone participate in. So it's really a children's emergency. This emergency, it's an emergency that has gone on so long that it's defining the lives of an entire generation of children. And you mentioned the resilience of children earlier, which is true, but it's equally true that the longer that such a conflict goes on, the more and more that resilience is weakened, and the more that has to be done for children to regain all this lost time, both psychologically but also in terms of their physical development.
Simon, if I could turn to you for a second here, let's step back and take a slightly wider lens on this for a minute. Official UN reports indicate that we're closing in on 2 million Syrians having fled their countries, trying to find safety in these neighboring countries. Obviously, the scale of humanitarian need is overwhelming to all of these host communities. Tell us what you're seeing in the region and where you're really concerned about pressure points.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Lisa. I mean, obviously, the place to start in all of this is inside Syria itself, which is where the conflict, the origin of this conflict, which is now rippling across the whole region, and where the violence is having an astonishing and absolutely terrible impact on the civilian population and on children above all. But if we look at it in a global sense, talking about children inside Syria and in those living in refugee communities around the region, we're looking at something like 4 million children in all. That's an astonishing number, and the real numbers may in fact be much higher than that. And certainly they are escalating, they're growing as the conflict expands. as the level of destruction escalates, damaging the basic services on which anyone living inside Syria depends upon. Health services, water networks, sanitation services, all of these things are being impacted steadily and eroded on an ever-escalating basis. So that is really where our concern begins, but it does now, given the dimensions that this conflict is assuming, we're seeing the effects being felt right across the region, in places like Iraq, in Egypt, even right across the Mediterranean. And so it will go on until we find the political solution to this crisis, which is the thing that we need most desperately of all.
Lucy, when you arrived at the camps, I'm really curious about getting a sense of what a child's life is like there day to day. What did you see for these children?
The first camp we went to was a concrete factory. And so the children saw us come up and they come running towards us, very excited, very welcoming, very happy to see, you know, people that are going to come and visit them and hopefully play games with them. That was their main focus. They were not looking for food or anything like that. They were just looking to engage with somebody. I think outside of some of the adults that were there, that a lot of the adults had either gone off to registration or just weren't around at all. There was one little girl who was losing her hair and her eyebrows, and you know, they play around this sort of water area which is toxic because of the chemicals that they use in that, you know, for the factory itself. And the children don't understand that, and they've been told before that this is not an area that they should play in, but you know, you can tell them one or two times and they'll listen, but then the next thing you know, they're running around in that water, and it is having health effects on them, clearly. They don't have the proper shoes or clothing, and I'm sure that they left their house and their neighborhood with absolutely nothing. I mean, they were fleeing for their lives. The parents asked for clothing and for any kind of shoes for the children. There were desperate conditions. The second refugee camp we visited, this is all in Bekaa Valley, it was a makeshift camp, and there was a latrine that was, you know, they dug a deep hole where there was a latrine for them to use to go to the bathroom. So there's feces and urine, you know, not far from the camps, and then down, if you walked, you know, down like 5 more minutes, there was a little creek that they were playing in and they were fishing in and washing their clothes in, and so clearly there was no fresh water there. And in the wintertime, that area floods and they have to move the tents. But what happens is that the water gets into where they're going to the bathroom, which gets into where they're living, and it's just there was lice, scabies. There's going to be a lot of disease, effects of diarrhea, and you know, for young kids and children, when they're younger, they're much more vulnerable and they're susceptible. So when they get sick, it takes a toll. So it's not a gradual progression of, oh well, you know, after tomorrow he's going to be worse. It's like it's incrementally worse by tenfold for them, and so they need help. And this is an area that UNICEF hadn't actually been able to even resource yet. And there's many areas like this because, you know, people are just trying to find a place of safety. So children are in a very vulnerable position. There's a great need there for services, just basic services, not just school, but sanitation and, you know, because water is really the key element I found in my experience with UNICEF, that is the center of how everything begins. For them to have water, it keeps children protected and keeps them hydrated and safe, and you know, all of the energy right now is, I think, just trying to, I mean, Luciano, tell me if you could probably elaborate on this, but it is something that their energy right now in Lebanon for the UNICEF office is so dispersed just trying to keep track of what people, where everybody is, let alone trying to raise the funds that they need to actually get to all of the people. And I'd say, I don't know how many, maybe what percentage do you think is registered, Luciano, at this point, all the people that are streaming in?
According to government estimates, there are around 600,000 or 700,000 currently in Lebanon who are not registered. Now, some of those do not need to be registered. They have the means to sustain themselves, but there is certainly a large proportion that do. And as UNICEF, of course, our mandate means that we are responsible to ensure that the rights of all children everywhere are fulfilled. So the challenge, as you rightly point out, is ensuring that we're able to focus our response on the most vulnerable children, regardless of where they are and where they're registered, or whether they're registered or not. And in the context of Lebanon, where unlike some other countries affected by this crisis, there are no formal camps. The camps that we're actually talking about on this call are, of course, informal, tented settlements where people have stopped, in some cases, literally by the side of the road with their families and slowly been joined by other families. And there are now more than 300 of these settlements all over the country. So it's a...
Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Really describe it for us. I think that Americans, in particular, if you've never seen a refugee site, these aren't even really camps, as you mentioned. Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like. What's it like for a mother, a father, trying to raise their children in these places? What does their shelter look like?
If I could just jump in visually for someone who hadn't been to this area before, and Luciano had been there since January, they have literally taken any sort of bags of potato sacks or vegetable sacks, and even advertisements, that you would normally hang, and they've sewn them together to create these makeshift tents. And it's astonishing how well put together they are, in terms of shelter, makeshift shelter. But it's a collage of essentially anything that they could find to create some sort of a housing for their families. And it's clearly not something that's going to last through any kind of season. They're not anything that's they're not durable. They're just something that's temporary for now. And I don't know how they're going to, we're going to be able to accommodate everybody, but I think that I think the main thing is to try to find a water resource, or have the ability to create some sort of, because the health situation will then become very dangerous for the people that live in that area, or who have been living in that area for a long time. So that was my experience with going in there.
So when Lucy's mentioned water a couple of times, Simon or Luciano, could either of you speak a little bit about UNICEF's involvement in trying to be sure that children have access to something as basic as clean water?
Well, I think just looking at it from the vantage point of here in Jordan, and from the work that we're doing right across the region, water and sanitation is really right at the center, the heart of everything that we're doing, especially over these coming months where summer is upon us, temperatures are soaring, and the need for water to wash, to feed, to quench the thirst of all these millions of children across the region has to be an absolute #1 priority, as Lucy says. So, seen from our perspective, I think we're doing everything possible. Inside Syria, that comes down to, for example, bringing in huge quantities of chlorine, which we're using to disinfect water, chlorinate drinking water, which would otherwise be coming out of people's taps untreated, and of course with all the dangers that would entail for children's health. So that's just one example. But Luciano, tell us a bit more about the way you're dealing with it. It's a very different situation in Lebanon, obviously.
It is, but it's equally critical, as you've both pointed out already. I mean, the situation in the camps is particularly dire because there are no taps obviously, and people are resorting to finding water from unsafe sources. So we're right now in the process of a massive scaling up of our water response, specifically in the tented settlements. And it really looks different settlement to settlement. There are some where the landowner, who might be a farmer, will allow us to connect to his irrigation pipe and allow refugees who are on his land to access his water that way. There are others that are not near that kind of infrastructure, so we're obliged to provide water tankers that come around every 2 or 3 days and fill up 1,000-liter, in some cases, household tanks that are shared amongst a few families that we've also provided. Then there are other opportunities in those settlements that are very close to municipal infrastructure, but that's fallen into disrepair, where for a relatively modest amount we can rehabilitate and ensure that water is available again for host communities and refugee communities alike. So it's very much a case of one size does not fit all, but what does fit all is that every child that does not have access to safe drinking water is a child that is in dire risk of contracting diseases, which are becoming more and more prevalent now that the hot summer months are coming, and all kinds of waterborne diseases are a possibility. And of course, disease can also lead to malnutrition.
Could you talk specifically about some of those diseases? Because again, for an audience whose clean water comes at the turn of a tap, what you're looking at is something very different. What diseases are these children at risk for? What can happen to them?
Well, particularly with water-related, obviously it's diarrheal disease, and the most severe form, the one that is most famous, and the one that is not yet in Lebanon, and we hope it certainly will not come, is of course cholera, which is endemic in Iraq, which is 2 countries away. Diarrhea is one of the biggest killers of children, and lack of access to safe water, and obviously lack of access to hygiene is one of the main causes of that, and that is something we're working desperately to prevent. It's not yet a widespread phenomenon, but we're very much in the preventative mode right now. It's only the 1st or 2nd of July today, but the temperatures in the Bekaa Valley, where Lucy was, are already in the mid to high 30s on the centigrade scale, which I believe was close to 100 in the Fahrenheit scale, and it's only getting hotter. The peak of summer's not even with us yet.
So, Lucy, did you have a sense of, when we describe being in this place and we say it's, Lebanon's roughly the size of Connecticut, can you describe what that felt like to see all of these people coming in and landing in this relatively small area?
I think that it's shocking to see, or to look at the numbers and to acknowledge having visited those refugee camps and seeing how crowded and in some ways hostile it's getting. There is a feeling of obviously frustration amongst the people, and of course for the children, their needs that are that they have that are not going to be met immediately. I think that, again, even under the worst circumstances, the children had a very bright, and they were still very bright energetically. They were very curious. They were very engaged with us. But I think this is not something that can last for a very long time. And I also think that when I was leaving, what I noticed is that children would run up to me and they were asking me to take them to school. So there is something that I think is, you just feel a sense of loss when you walk out of the refugee camp, knowing that this is not something that you can give them immediately. Clearly, there is a great need for finances to be to stream in to help in this situation, because that's what we really need, and that's what UNICEF is billboarding right now. That's what's currently going to help build pumps or wells or whatever it is that we need. And of course, Simon and Luciano know best what that need is. And because children are the most vulnerable, they're in a circumstance right now that they don't have a choice. And that means that we don't have a choice. So I have to say, I mean, I've been to the Congo, and that was a very, very difficult trip. This was probably up there with that. And it's a desperate situation, and I think a lot of people feel like, you know, this is yet another something going on, you know, that why should we be involved? And we shouldn't be involved because children, no matter where they are, deserve to have a childhood. And, you know, these kids, it's not too late for them. So we have to engage, and we have to, you know, we can't wait for an invitation. We have to just start right now. This is the time, and these kids are going to grow up. It's going to be a lost generation of children, and it's going to create a lot of political unrest in the future. You know, as we know, lack of education does not create you know, a very good government or ruling class. So this is something that we need to focus on and think about.
Simon, why don't you talk to us a little bit about UNICEF does prioritize education in times of emergency. Can you explain a little bit more about why that's such an important focus?
I think, yeah, I mean, we actually term education to be something, it's like a life-saving resource, and I think then that's for a number of reasons, but you can see it very clearly in a crisis of this scale as we're experiencing now, because in a situation where you've got huge numbers of families who've been forced out of their homes and communities, and when they are being re-established in IDP shelters or in refugee camps or in informal settlements, the kind that Lucy visited recently, you can see that when it comes to establishing something which children recognize, something which they can associate with, that makes a connection for them amid all the upheaval and turmoil that's going on all around them. If you can get a school established, it becomes essentially a safe space, a protective space in which children can really start to you know, find the bits and pieces, the crucial elements of their lives, which will help put them back on track, help them essentially cope with their surroundings in an incredibly difficult situation that they're in. So that's why in any crisis that UNICEF is involved with, it is right up there for us. You know, not alongside immunization, which of course is life-saving, alongside the clean water and the toilets and everything else, you establish schools or some kind of learning space, because it is what children can start to rebuild something from. That's why it's so essential.
Lucy, were you able to see any schools in session while you were there?
No, not in this case. We have in the past in all the other trips I've ever taken, but in this case there were no schools established yet. And as Luciano pointed out earlier, you know, this again isn't a camp, a formal camp. It's a settlement, and these are people that just create a place to put their bags or put their children, and hopefully have something to shelter them from the sun or from the rain and from the weather. So. There were no schools established. There was no school in the box, and this is something that I think is a huge issue with the situation created by not knowing where people are going. It's almost impossible to be able to you know, figure out what resources you need and where you need them. Luciano, maybe you can sort of touch on that as well, because that is a very, you know, when you don't know what you're supposed to be targeting, it becomes much more difficult to actually give people what they need, especially for children.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you raise a couple of critical points, actually. The first, perhaps, that I can build on is the challenge of ensuring that these hundreds of thousands of Syrian school-age children have access to learning spaces. It's an enormous challenge, and we've managed with all of our partners I mentioned before to enroll just over 30,000 children so far. but the scale, the magnitude of where this crisis is heading mean that we expect by the end of the year that around 500,000 Syrian school-age children will require access to some form of learning space. Now, at best, that would be a school that is already obviously operating. In other cases, that simply may not be possible because where a child and a child's family is living is simply too far, or other reasons, and in those circumstances we will look to something that is called non-formal education, which is let's say a more ready-made solution that is a bridge to allowing a child to enroll in a school in the sense that perhaps you know, a Western viewer would understand. But education, as Simon pointed out, is fundamental in this crisis because it is actually a means to protect children from harm, because there is a safe space for those hours of the day where a child is nurtured, where a child can interact with his or her friends, and where a sense of normalcy can be restored in a child's life. The second point that Lucy brings up, which is something that certainly we've grappled with over the past months, is that, again, the magnitude of this crisis is so large and is overwhelming the humanitarian community, despite everybody's best efforts, that we've really had to decide carefully where in Lebanon we want to focus our attention. And for us, that means that with the limited resources we have, we're focusing on those areas, obviously, where there are the most refugees, but also where there are the poorest Lebanese, because they're also suffering, as Lucy mentioned right in her introduction, because they were already in difficult conditions. There are almost 30% of Lebanese living under the poverty line, which is less than $4 per day, and the majority of refugees have settled in those locations. And now we have a situation where there is a competition for access to services, for access to livelihood. Daily labor is something that is both sought after by not only Syrian refugees to sustain their families, but obviously also Lebanese who are also needing to keep their children in school and put food on the table. So it's really a crisis of layer upon layer of challenge and complexity, which is not to say it's hopeless, not by any stretch. There is still a huge amount that can be done. The challenge is that the resources that are available to respond to this crisis are being outstretched by the growing need. Somebody mentioned, I think it may have been you, Lisa, that in June alone, nearly 70,000 refugees came into Lebanon, and that number is at least the same, if not increasing on a monthly basis. So this is really a call to action, I think, for the entire global community to continue to respond, because these children are, as in any conflict, those who are paying the highest price and those who have nothing to do with it.
Well, we're starting to get some questions in from our viewers here, and so to that point, Nicolo in California is asking you a question, Lucy. She says, now that you're back in the United States, although I think actually you're in London today, how do you plan on staying involved to help Syria's children?
Well, I think what we're doing right now is we're trying to rally as much press and as much attention, and as Luciano said, and I'm sure Simon knows as well, it's a call to action, and we are trying to step outside of what's happening in the news and to bring attention to the children that are in this situation, and to basically raise as many funds as we can. And I think outside of that is to just bring attention and to educate people on what is happening outside of the war, what is happening outside of the political warfare, and to really talk about the consequences of what is happening to the actual people and to billboard, the children. So going and visiting Lebanon and to learn about it firsthand and witness it is really only the first step. And after that, you try to bring the attention and to basically take that and sort of disperse that information wherever you can, however you can do it. And this is one of the ways is through this chat and to educate people. And for me, whenever I go on a UNICEF trip, I find that it's educational for me as well. And in every situation, every country is always a different circumstance. But the common denominator always is and will be children and what their needs are.
A question from Nathan Ortega in Texas. I think this is probably one for you, Luciano. He's asking, is UNICEF concerned about the hotter summer weather in Syria and neighboring countries? And what are some of the specific challenges that this hot weather presents?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Nathan. Again, yes, we're absolutely concerned in all the countries affected by this crisis, because summer in the Middle East is extremely hot and extremely dry. So again, we come back to the question of water, sanitation, and hygiene as being right now the single biggest health priority. And perhaps Simon can speak more to the regional response to that, but certainly, as I mentioned earlier, in Lebanon, with a number of partners spread all over the country, we are doing everything possible to ensure that safe drinking water, sanitation facilities, and hygiene materials and hygiene awareness is being transmitted across all affected communities. But again, it differs from country to country, and perhaps Simon can speak to the Syria context itself.
Yeah, I mean, Syria, I did mention earlier that what we're doing there is focusing much more on keeping the public utility, the public service functioning as best we can. So that relates to, for example, providing the chlorine, which keeps the water clean, providing generators to keep the water pumping stations actually operational, because in many cases the power supply is down, so that causes a major crisis, particularly in urban settings. But let me mention also the situation here in Jordan, which is quite different from that of Lebanon, although the number of Syrian refugees is about the same, in fact, slightly less probably than in Lebanon. But here we have something like 140,000 Syrian refugees living in one tented camp, the Zaatari camp up near the border. It's an astonishing sight. It didn't even exist less than a year ago. That's quite astonishing. It was opened at the end of July last year. So that's how it's grown. And the provision of water there is one of our main responsibilities as UNICEF. So we're sending in, trucking in water, something like over 300 truckloads of water into the camp to provide for the showers, the toilets, the drinking water for all of these people living inside. And as the numbers climb inside Jordan, we're actually looking at establishing another new camp, also in the desert, and there again, water will be one of the prime needs, the absolutely essential needs, before the camp can even be established. And right now, as I say, with summer upon us, with the desert climate, a very, very arid setting, water is just like number one priority.
Simon, it's hard to even understand the mechanics of getting that much water into a place. Can you describe, I mean, how many trucks is that? How much time does that take?
Well, it's a daily, ongoing process. It basically never ends. Although we are looking at establishing an actual piped network, which is probably a more effective way of managing this situation. But it's been a difficult challenge that we've been faced, and certainly for much of the last year, we have been relying on big tankers. And they essentially go to a well, a deep bore well, which drills right down into an aquifer underneath the desert, brings the water up, It is then cleaned, it's purified, treated to ensure that when it's delivered into the camp, it is fit to drink. And that's absolutely essential, because the last thing we would want would be for people to start getting sick in numbers in a setting like a camp where the conditions are very crowded, very large number of children, something like 50% or more of the camp's population are children. So vital that the water, when it's delivered, when it's dispensed at the taps around the camp, that it is clean.
Are people limited in terms of how much water they can have in the camps right now? How are you rationing that?
Well, that's something that we've had to look at because of the immense size of the demand. However, at the moment, the water allocation is well above what are considered internationally acceptable standards in refugee settings. So people up till now have been really had relatively plentiful water, and that of course makes the conditions, the other conditions in a very dusty, dry climate, that much more acceptable. It's still, it has to be said, a very difficult setting. There's no getting away from that, and we're doing everything we can to mitigate it and to make life as acceptable as possible for the children in particular.
Lucy, another question here for you from Hannah Robinson in New York. She asks, did Lucy have a chance to speak to some of the Syrian children? And if so, what were some of the things you've heard from them?
That's a good question, Hannah. The main question was, can we take them to school? That was the main question that they had. As I said earlier, they did not ask for toys or clothing or even food. They just wanted to go to school. And of course, that was incredibly heartbreaking. And you know, I noticed in one of the rooms that we were in, where there were maybe 15 people living in that space, they had a collection of stones, and one looked like an old block. And these were the toys that the children were playing with. And they did not seem to have a problem with that at all. They have an incredible imagination, and as children always do. They also wanted to play games, simple things like red light, green light, and we kind of created a train where the kids kind of, you know, all connected to each other, and we walked around, we kind of chugged around the camps, which was really fun. I mean, it's incredible because they really just want to engage, and they want to interact, and they want to learn, and you can tell they want to be challenged mentally. They want to be challenged, and if they don't, you could see there were some of the older kids that were getting a little bit kind of more, you know, they weren't bullying the other kids, but they just need an extension, an outlet for themselves, because children need that. Kids need that. It's incredibly important for them. You can't just let them sit idly. It doesn't benefit anyone. And so engaging them, I think, is the most creative way, and allowing them to, you know, shine. That's what they do. Children have an imagination, and that's what's so beautiful about them, and that's why I'm spending time with them so much.
You've been in these situations so many times for us now, Lucy. Do you have a set of, it's always a little bit awkward, I know, when you go into one of these camps or one of these places and you want to immediately bond with the children and try to spend as much time as you can with them. What do you do when you first get to a camp to try to make that connection?
I have to say, I mean, even in the most difficult situations, kids will always run up to you. That's what they do naturally. Have a natural curiosity. When I was in the Congo, there were some children playing jump rope, and I kind of helped them play. I also, you know, got in and started jumping with them. I mean, I think if you show that you want to play and engage with them, they really respond really well to that. It's a form of communication that children have. It's almost as if they see if you know, it's something that because it's something they can relate to, it allows them to feel like, you know, a trust towards you if you're willing to sort of, you know, get down on the ground and play with them. That means that you're one of them, and that's easy for me to do, honestly. And I've been lucky enough that the kids have always been incredibly welcoming. It doesn't mean that they don't have needs. They do, but it really breaks my heart to think that I could not give them it would have been easier for me to hand out, food or water than to not be able to tell them right then and there that I was going to be able to take them to school. So there's no easy solution to any of this, but it just goes to show how important children find school to be. And as both Simon and Luciano pointed out, it gives them a sense of normalcy in a space that is a strange land, in a difficult situation. It helps them to feel like there's a safe haven for them, even if it's in this situation with war, but even in natural disasters. You set that up, it gives them a sense of calm, and that is something that they should have. It should be given.
There's another question here to that point from Jessica Wynn in New York. Luciano, I think this is probably a good one for you. She points out that in some cases, these children have been away from their homes for as much as 2 years. What does that do to a child? What do you see in these children who've been away from their homes for so long?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult for a child. I mean, if you just put it into a context where you're away from your child, or for a weekend, and what it means when your child comes home again, and the excitement of returning home. And this is something that these children simply can't even imagine when they will ever be able to go home. I mean, I've spoken to families in the north of Lebanon, in a region called Akkar, who have been living in camps like this for 2 years. I met a woman whose children had been out of school for 2 years, and I think it's difficult to overestimate the psychological impact that kind of dislocation and disconnection from your home, living in a place with, as Lucy was alluding to, nothing in terms of mental stimulation, nothing in terms of activity, every day the same, no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, and then you start talking to parents, and I'm the father of a 3-year-old, and what really strikes you is how incredibly disempowering it is, or it must be, to be the mother or father of one of these children, and not be able to say what's going to happen, and not to be able to say we're going to go home soon, to not be able to give the basic reassurance that any parent wants to give a child. It's just a very humbling conversation to have with anybody. And on the scale that we see in Lebanon, the number of families, the sheer number of families who are in this situation with a huge question mark over their future, who in some cases I've spoken to have seen their homes destroyed after they left by looking on Facebook, would you believe, or by calling back and their relatives saying, sorry, your house is gone, and understanding that even when that day comes that you can go home, you've got nothing left to go home to, and all of that with small children in the midst that you're trying to care for and protect is just an overwhelming challenge for any parent. And what's striking for me in this conflict is that many of the people who were living in these places lived lives like yours and mine before they came here. They had jobs, and they dropped their children off at school, and they went for picnics on the weekend. And almost overnight, they find themselves in an impossible situation with no one able to answer questions about what's going to happen next. And maybe I'll just end on this point, which is that several weeks ago, we went to a place very close to where Lucy went to in the Bekaa with the Australian Foreign Minister. And in his conversations with people, one woman, very angry woman, was saying how furious she and her family was that the world seems to have forgotten Syria. And she likened her life to have the same value as a piece of lettuce, was what she said. And this sentiment is certainly there now among the hundreds of thousands of Syrians who find themselves unable to go home, and are wondering what the world is doing to help them.
Luciano, we got one more question for you from Nikki from Massachusetts. Wants to know, what is Lucy like to travel with?
Very difficult. Very difficult. Lucy is incredibly accommodating and flexible, and a very low maintenance famous person, I can vouch for.
Yes, that's the word we get back to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Lucy, as you've already said, gives so much to children around the world, is incredibly generous with her time to UNICEF. I think Lebanon was her 10th or 11th mission in as many years. And with someone with a schedule, an unrelenting schedule like hers, I mean, we're just incredibly grateful that she finds the time somehow to come to what are often very dangerous places. We were together also on the Congo trip that Lucy mentioned earlier, and we're just very thankful for that someone of her stature is willing to give so much and so frequently to UNICEF so that we can spread the word.
We are. And we're wrapping up in a little while here, but Lucy, I also wanted you to talk a little bit about what made you want to come work with UNICEF in the first place, and what has it meant to you?
I had been looking for something to focus my attention on, and I had gone to very many charity dinners and events, and I just felt like I was a little bit out of the loop. I mean, I was there and I was participating, but I wasn't really involved, and I decided I should just put my attention towards one thing. I knew that I wanted to get involved with an organization that was helping children, and I knew that it would be important to do it on a more global level, and so I did a little bit of research, and UNICEF was on the top of the list. So I called them myself and spoke to them, and Lisa was the first person, you're one of your colleagues, who I met, and then very shortly thereafter went on a trip, my first trip to Lesotho. And from that point on, I have to say that meeting these children, but really meeting the people that work at UNICEF, I mean, like Simon and like Luciano and Lisa and all these wonderful people I've met all over the world, really, have changed my life. The dedication and the commitment and the honor that they bring to their jobs in the most difficult situations has really forced me to look at how I live my life and how I commit to something. I mean, yes, I have gone on several missions, but that's really nothing compared to living in these areas for 3 to 6 years or more, dedicating your life and being in one of the most harsh conditions and circumstances when people are desperate and children are dying by the numbers. That is not an easy thing to live with or in on a daily basis. So I feel like I really don't, I wish I could contribute more, but it is something that I continue to strive to better myself and to learn more from, from people who really live this life. And I mean, I think you can tell from what Simon and what Luciano have said today, they really have a grasp on what is happening, and their intention is really true. And these children, are lucky because they have people that really care about them and want to do better by them. And so I think as a team, we all work together to connect, to raise funds, and to bring attention, and to be on the ground. And so the one thing for me with UNICEF is that, when things happen, they're already on the ground. They've been on the ground for maybe over a decade already, and that's something that's very, it's very heartwarming to know that. It's not like they're showing up because there's an emergency. They've been there already. I feel very, I feel very lucky and honored that I was able to be a part of this organization and continue to. They work not just specifically with refugees, but also specifically, they have a graph that they cover of education, sanitation, hygiene, immunization, nutrition. These are all things that are all connected. They're not separate things. So anything that I can do for UNICEF, I will always step up to.
Well, we are profoundly grateful, as always, and really appreciate your time in this. And Simon and Luciano, yours as well. All of you, please take care. We'll be wrapping up here. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we go, Simon or Luciano?
I'm waiting for him. He's waiting for me, I think. But
Simon, go.
I tell you what. I mean, it was just the point Luciano was talking about. You know, the length of the crisis. You know, 2 years. Well, it's almost unconscionable. No one believed when this thing kicked off in the beginning of 2011 that we would still be talking about this. That it would have come to this state of things. At the, 2 years and 3 months or whatever it is on. It is truly, mind-blowing in that sense. To me, everything that Luciano said is correct about, the fact that these families are looking at a long, period of exile, of living outside their home. What to me is always amazing is the fact that they still remain so connected to their homes, to their country, to Syria. Ask any Syrian child or any Syrian person what they most want to do. It is to go home, and that attachment is there. And what we can do, I believe, through as this crisis goes on, and it will continue, is to ensure that they have the ability and that the skills and the desire to rebuild their country once that moment comes, and it will come sooner or later. So that, to me, is what, if you like, sustains me sometimes when I just think, this is just going on forever and it's all hopeless. It isn't. We're all heading towards a better Syria in the future, helping the people, the children of Syria, rebuild their country again.
And perhaps, Lisa, if I could add, if I may, I guess there are two fundamental things that I hope can be catalyzed through this kind of conversation. The first, obviously, is the question of resources to respond to such a protracted crisis, which is going to continue. It seems inevitable that it's going to continue for at least the medium term, and the needs are increasing. And Simon and I were speaking just today about how we're going to ensure that we continue to have the capacity to respond not just at this level, but on an ever-increasing level. But the second message, I think, is that, as Simon said very early on, a humanitarian response is not the solution to this crisis. This crisis requires a political solution. So I think for all the people watching, aside from doing whatever they can to mobilize resources so organizations like UNICEF can respond, it's about applying pressure on political leadership to find a solution to what admittedly seems to be an intractable political conundrum. But frankly, without that solution, the humanitarian context and situation is only going to get worse.
Thank you to all of you so much for being with us today, and to all of you who sent us questions, I want to thank you as well. Please go to UNICEFUSA.org. We'll be posting a copy of this chat to YouTube, and you can also go there to see a wonderful video from Lucy's recent visit, which I hope you'll watch and share as well. Thank you all for your support and your time, and Lucy, thank you again to you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Simon and Luciano.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye to you. Bye, everyone. Thank you.